If we are ready to begin, I'll take a second to introduce Christopher Cook, as a lot of you know him already. And we are really lucky tonight to get a demonstration, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I did a plein air painting the other day, and we're going to talk about how I took that plein air painting onto a larger canvas and continued to keep the looseness that you're forced to get while you're on location. It certainly helps that you have all the moving light and either water or wildlife in overcoming those plein air challenges. Uh, you have more options for your design rather than being fixed to a photo. Because things are moving, you get to choose the best of what's in front of you. I went ahead and recorded this ahead of time just so that I could talk over it here and we could get a lot further with the demo in the amount of time we have. So the plein air piece here, I'm starting with my 3-value study. I've toned the canvas off with a neutral color, raw umber. It's not a terribly warm brown. It's sort of on the cooler side, so it's fairly neutral. And I tone it to, sort of the value that I want my middle values to be. That way, my lights are going to show up on top of that. My shadows are also going to show up on top of that. Usually, as I'm starting on location, I tend to start with the light, but it doesn't have to be that way. The tendency after I get my middle on there is to start with my shape of light, just because in plein air, the light is what's changing all the time, and you want to get that shape down as soon as you can. However, I will start with whatever is the most fleeting thing. So in some cases, it's a different effect. It's the wave that's at a certain moment, or it's the there's maybe it's the shadows. I have had times where the shadows move very quickly, especially in the forest. If I'm painting out in the forest, the shadows are moving around so fast. And if that's what your painting is about, then that's what I would usually recommend starting with. Speaking of those shapes and what it's about, the other thing is that whatever value you have the least of in your painting is going to end up being your most important value, or your most important shape of values, because the thing you have least of, it tends to draw people's attention. When we look at the sky and we see the stars, there's a lot more space than there are stars. The stars are the thing there's less of. But we see the stars. Or if I have a blank page and I put a red dot on it, you're going to say, what is there? There's a red dot, right? You're not going to say, oh, there's a bunch of white space. It's that thing that's scarce that we value so much. So when you're working with your piece, that's something to think about. How much middle value do you want? How much dark value are you putting in? And which one is it really about? Another way you can emphasize the one that it's about is your value steps. And what I mean by that is, what is the distance in value from your dark to your middle? Is your dark value and your middle value closer? If they're closer, that's going to cause your light value to be even that much more important. If your middle value and your light value are compressed and closer together, then your dark value is going to stand out more. I looked out there, and what I saw was I was standing over this little creek ravine that runs behind like our neighborhood. And there were these little birds, which I learned are called coots. Prior to looking them up, they were always the bird that's not a duck. The one that you look at and you said, that's not a duck. This little coot was kind of sneaking out from underneath the brush along the creek bed. And then there was another one that was swimming alongside it in the creek. And after a while of just staring and thinking about what I was attracted to, I really got interested in the narrative story of these little, birds walking along the creek. I decided that this one was going to be the focal point because, it was just interesting coming out from under there. So we've got these sticks, these twigs of the brush that are curled, that are coming down. And I like the shape they were making. However, of course, I chose where they're going to be. So I was inspired by the scene, but I was kind of choosing the spacing and where I felt that they should be relative to each other. And the energy was this downward energy that led you to the bird. Between the energy, coming down from these twigs, and then this other bird sort of lining up off of the edge of the canvas, you sort of get this energy that comes through my focal area. This is an 18 by 18 square panel, and I've already toned it off, and I'm going about getting my shape of light in here. However, as I'm doing this, I'm also thinking about the changes I want to make to it. For me, the best plein air painting to take onto a bigger canvas is one that I didn't get my idea out. And that's why nowadays, when I do plein air, I'm not even looking to do a complete painting. Because when I do a complete painting, I don't have the motivation to want to do it on a bigger painting. I don't want to recreate the painting. I like to have that feeling of engaged creation. When I have a design that I like, but I feel like it could be taken further with brushwork, or just the whole concept can be taken further, then I get excited. So here I am. One of the things I did is I made the brush bigger. By making the brush bigger, I made the birds smaller on the scale of the canvas. That increased because as I thought about what the story was, it's this bird coming out from under the brush. And by making the bird smaller, you sort of get more of this kind of like it's hidden in the brush. It's being covered up by this. It's coming out of something, and the world is bigger. I like that sense of it being a part of this bigger world, that it's this little bird. That was just an important part of the narrative. And really, you want your abstract painting, meaning your design, to support your narrative. So if it's important to the narrative, the bird's small, then an abstract element would be, how big are the other shapes? How big, what is the relative size? That doesn't change anything about the bird or the narrative. That just changes the abstract element of that relative size of the shapes. So also I wanted the pattern to be more interesting on the left-hand side, on our left. So I got a little more into the pattern. I thought on the bigger canvas, I could have that pattern happen more. And I also made the other shape of the darks a more vertical energy, shoved it further to the right-hand side to even increase that difference between what the mass of the lights and middles versus the mass of the shadows was. Let's see. So another thing I'm thinking about here is that, when I'm breaking my canvas up into quadrants, I don't want any of my quadrants to be symmetrical. So again, like we said, we don't want the same size shapes repeating, the same distance of shapes repeating, and I don't really want the same ratio of values in each quadrant. So a lot of times I'll say, if one quadrant is mostly light with a little bit of middle, I don't want another one of my quadrants of the painting to also be mostly light with middle. Or at least I don't want one to mirror the other. So in this case, right, if we take the lower left-hand quadrant, it's mostly middle with a tiny bit of light. You have the light on the water, these little bits of light. The upper left-hand quadrant is kind of equal middle and light, but a lot more light. So it's a mostly light quadrant, light values with middle. And then I have my top right-hand quadrant of this painting. It's mostly dark values with some middle values in it. And then my lower left-hand corner, or my lower right-hand corner, is mostly middle value with some dark shapes. So that's sort of one more thing I'm thinking about. variety is really the secret, not secret, but it's an important part of the equation when it comes to design. Um, if you're looking at something like a dice or a road sign, right, those are meant to give you information very quickly. So everything is symmetrical. You're traveling down the highway at 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour. You have to know what the sign says in an instant. They very intentionally make them symmetrical, simple, symbolic shapes. Whether there's a curve in the road up ahead, right? It's the most simple shape that they can make. Or a person walking in a crosswalk. It's going to be centered in your sign, and it's going to be the most simple shape. And what we're trying to do as artists is the entirely opposite thing. We don't want to communicate our idea as quickly as possible. We want to communicate as long as possible. We want to create a painting that lives with the person for a long time, something that somebody can continue to look at for years and years, for decades. So we want our shapes to be complex. We want to not have things be symmetrical. We want our color complex, our brushwork complex. We want every aspect of the painting to be something that's considered and intentional and typically complex. Though maybe not everything is complex. Maybe you choose. Maybe you decide to offset something, a complex brushwork with a simplistic one. That's making me think of an artist named Dan McCaw. If anyone's familiar with him, he does this really beautiful brushwork. The brushwork is super thick and luscious and gorgeous. And a lot of times he'll do big spaces of really simple grays, flat color. And, he pulls it off. It looks really beautiful. The flat color really emphasizes how complex the brushwork that he did use was. So most of all, it's about being intentional. Throughout the painting, after I had my big masses, I started thinking about how am I breaking up those masses into smaller shapes. And again, part of the way to keep things loose is to keep things loose from the beginning. By not starting with a drawing, by not starting with edges, you're inventing the painting as you go. It's sort of at the end of the painting that you want to start to bring things into focus or choose where a hard edge should be, where you want someone's eyes to rest or be drawn to. Naturally, someone's going to look where there's a hard edge. And rather than the default being drawing and then loosening it up, if you start by the default being that everything is going to be loose, everything is going to have soft edges, and then I'm only going to use an edge or bring something into higher focus when I intentionally want that to be an area of higher focus, an area of tighter painting. Instead of a painting of description, it makes it an impression with some areas of higher focus.
Hey, Chris, just to interrupt real quick, somebody would like to know what colors you started with on your palette.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If I just go through my palette as I have it set up, I have cad red, cad orange, transparent orange, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, deep, lemon yellow, a phthalo green, and phthalo blue, an ultramarine blue, dioxazine purple, quinacridone, magenta, and alizarin crimson. And of course, I also have, white. I just using Permalba here. I'm sure there are some questions.
Well, and definitely now I want to go loosen up a lot of my paintings. I'm definitely inspired with the fun and the color and the texture. And so I can't wait. And I'm sure we do have questions.
So Chris, was that a fan brush you used?
I was using a fan brush. Yes, I have a tendency to use the fan brush and use certain tools not because they're the only way to be loose, but actually because I tend to have less control. That allows me to be a little looser.
Yeah, I
And-
was watching you use your, technique with how you held your brush and using that fan brush. It was great.
Yeah, and I'll grab some other brushes that I like to use for different effects are these giant Home Depot cheap, $1 brushes. You can run it right through and drag paint and make a whole area soft.
Is that what you were doing with the squeegee sort of?
Yeah, absolutely. Using a variety of tools in a variety of ways is going to add to the playfulness and different ways of softening an edge. Where you decide to describe an object, it's very important that that is accurate. But by losing the rest of the object, you actually get better drawing because it allows the viewer to imagine the rest of the object. So by having just the places that come into focus be accurate, you can convey a lot more with a lot less work than trying to render every aspect.
All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I personally would like to thank you a billion trillion times. I so enjoyed this. I am so inspired. And then we will keep in touch with you about maybe a future workshop as soon as especially when we can get together. I'm putting myself on the list.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed sharing with all of you and look forward even more to connecting in person. That'll be fun.